How many discounts does USAA Auto Insurance offer? Too many to say here. Multi-vehicle discount, safe driver discount, new vehicle discount, storage discount, legacy.
How many discounts will you stack up? Visit USAA.com/auto discounts. Restrictions apply.
Whatever the occasion, effortless elegance is right this way. Because Hilton brings you new ways to stay courtesy of the Nomad London. And it doesn't stop at award-winning dining in a space draped in velvet and illuminated by vintage chandeliers. No, this day goes beyond with unparalleled personalized service and attentive hospitality. Oh, and did we mention the Nomad London can be booked using your Hilton Honors points at Hilton.com? Hilton, for the stay.
Hello, everybody. I am Eric J. Brown, and welcome to YA OK, your favorite podcast about young adult novels. And Alyssa, my wonderful co-host, say hello.
Hello. I'm wonderful. I loved our conversation today.
Yes, me too. I will keep it quick because obviously this is a longer episode because, Brian has so much to talk about just with his books, but then we also get to talk about some really cool stuff about getting books adapted, whatever, adapted, especially by friggin' icons like Martin Scorsese. So
yeah.
Stick around and listen to that exciting little tidbit.
And this is one of our longer conversations, and I could have talked to Brian for a million more years because he is such an interesting storyteller and so lovely to talk to. He has so many, like his interest in film and his interest in creating these really beautiful worlds is very cool. So I heard someone describe the invention of Hugo Cabret as cozy fantasy. And I was like, wow, that's a really great description. And I love that, like, there's its own little category in that. But today we talked about Runaway With Me, which is his first YA book. And it's another, no surprise, beautiful story. And some of his illustrations are in the book as well. So stay tuned for this amazing conversation.
5 long years, our lives like magnetic fields. You are my universe. You are my universe, and I'm just a planet.
Hello, Brian.
Hi, how are you?
Great. Wonderful. We were just talking about Alyssa's hair because she put extensions
I
in.
did. It's very long. It's very heavy, though. And I'm already really not looking forward to the showering situation that I'm going to have. I forgot what that's going to be like, but that's okay. We do a lot. We do a lot for, what is the phrase? Pain is beauty. Beauty is pain.
The price of beauty.
Yeah, I know. And it's now a really beautiful sunny day on the East Coast. Mm-hmm. And I already know the heat is going to be a problem, but I'll take it. I like the sunny day.
Yeah, Brian, are you on the East Coast, West Coast?
I am. I'm in Brooklyn right now.
Oh, no way. Cool. Okay, so you're experiencing this beautiful day too.
Yes, it's quite nice.
It's so nice.
Thank God it's not cold anymore.
Yeah, I know. I can't do it anymore. I can't do it. It's driving me nuts. Yep. I understand why people like Snowbird now because I can't do it. Well, I'm so excited to talk to you, Brian. I loved Hugo, and this is a very cool... You are such an interesting person because you're also an illustrator. Yeah. And so your art in storytelling expands in such a different way than other people that we've had on the podcast. So I'm really excited to talk to you.
Oh, thanks so much.
So you have a new book coming out too called Runaway With Me. Is that your first YA?
It is. I have never written about teenagers before.
What do you think the difference is, like, now that because you did mostly middle grade, because I think the invention of Hugo Cabret is middle grade, right?
Yes.
And so is Wonderstruck. And like, what did it take you a while to get to that voice, like the YA voice, or was it something that like you kind of accessed pretty easily?
It technically took me 34 years to get to my YA voice because my first book was published when I was 26, I think. And my first character was about 10. And then about 15 years later, when I made The Invention of Hugo Cabret, my main character had aged up to about 12. By the time I made The Marvels, about 8 years later, the main characters were about 13, 14, 13 maybe. And and now these two 16-year-old boys wandered into my life, my storytelling life. And I can see the continuum. Like, it feels very much like writing is writing, storytelling is storytelling. Figuring out why you're using pictures is going to be a question that is interesting to me. But yeah, I'm writing about falling in love for the first time. I'm writing about what it means to allow yourself to be touched, to touch somebody, to be seen in a way. And so there are certain elements that are new, just because my previous characters would not have been interested in those things because they're younger.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But in terms of finding a place you belong, finding someone who understands you, finding and creating a kind of family outside of your biological family unit, like that, this is something I've been writing about for a very long time.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite. I guess I wouldn't call it a trope, but I just love like the found family, and like where it's the kind of the offshoot of like what your biological family is, but it's like, this is the people that you are choosing to actually make your family.
Yeah.
I just think those stories there's just so much there to them, I think.
Yeah, I'm a very literal writer. I don't generally think very much about theme or symbolism. I'm generally thinking, how does this person get from here to there?
Mm-hmm.
So when I finished The Invention of Hugo Cabret, if you had asked me what it was about, I would have said it's about a kid who lives in a train station who meets this mean old man who once made movies. But when I was at a signing after the book came out, an adult reader came up to me and said, I love that this book is how we make our own families. And of course, like, I made that happen. Like, I was aware, I was writing about an orphan. I wanted him to be safe in a family at the end. But I realized that she had told me what not only that book was about, but what all my books are about and what all my books would be about. So once that was consciously in my mind, it became the forefront, or came first when I was thinking up the story for Wonderstruck and the Marvels. I knew that would be what I was writing towards.
I love that.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And found family, the importance of storytelling is being able to, there's a million ways to describe the importance of storytelling, so I'm not going to take a stab at the only one, but part of it is being able to have, especially young readers, see examples of things like found family and being seen and feeling loved and what that can look like. I'm a sex and relationship coach. And so I look at a lot of relationship dynamics, and so much of what we learn is through the example of our community and the people around us. And a lot of us have parents who don't really know what they're doing. And maybe they have communications. I always say our parents traumatize us in just different ways, all different ways. And, they don't mean to. They're doing their best. They're doing the best they can with the tools that they have. But then the importance of storytelling is being able to give you other tools, other examples, other things to strive for and emulate in your life. And I love found family in storytelling, especially when it comes to queer communities, because it's increasingly important there.
Yeah, and I think everybody eventually makes their own family. Everybody, if we're lucky, we get to grow up and leave a safe or relatively safe place. Hopefully it's safe. Many times it's not, but at a certain point, we get to go off out into the world. And generally, this is true for a lot of middle grade readers and a lot of people who write for young people, is we often have to find ways for our young protagonists to do things that a lot of young people may not have to do on their own, like go off by themselves. Like usually when you're 10 to 12, you are not out in the world by yourself trying to figure out how to live in the walls of a train station or, whatever it is that we create in our stories, but we're creating a kind of symbolic journey that is about a person who is very young experiencing something that they will experience when they get older. So it's a way that it can, for the reader who may not be having the same experience as the character, for understanding what independence might be like, for understanding what it means to find your way in the world and figure out how to get something to eat and where to, sleep in a safe space. So when you're writing about teenagers, when I was writing Runaway With Me, it was the first time where the characters actually have the ability to be autonomous in a way that a 10 or 11 or 12-year-old doesn't, although the character is still dependent on his mom. He's raised by a single mom in Runaway With Me. But he's able to go off on his own. He's able to find space between him and his mother, away from his mother, which is one of the big things that parents and kids have to deal with when they're teenagers, is figuring out how to become independent. And that's a actual thing that teenagers are experiencing. So I'm not writing like a symbolic journey about something that a teenager would not really normally get to do. I'm writing about something that every teenager is actually dealing with.
Yeah, I know that with YA especially, there always has to be like some way to get the parents out of the way, because it's like, if there's an issue that comes up, the character has to figure out how to solve it themselves. They can't just let their parents do it for them. So it's like a lot of people just like, oh, I'll just kill off the parents, or I'll just kind of make them absentee or something. But this was, it's Danny's mom is in Italy, right? She's working at a museum.
Yes.
So he's kind of exploring Italy on his own and finding that independence, but you didn't have to like create this traumatic event to get him there. So.
I did kill his father.
Well, that's okay. Actually, at least one parent should be killed, I think.
No, the father actually isn't dead. I killed him off. And like in the narrative, he was a student with the mom when they were both grad students, and just isn't in Danny's life. He's just not part of the story. Yeah. And so he does have a living mom. I do often leave, one parent living. And if I do have both parents living, they generally are very distant, very either physically or emotionally, because that is the main, one of the main things we all have to figure out, is how to let the young person experience their independence. And there's actual, situations in the story where the mom is struggling to figure out how to be close to her son. She's a good mom. She's trying to do things that she thinks her son would like doing, while she's also very busy with the job that has brought her for 10 weeks to Italy. She's an academic, and this old book has been discovered in a museum, and she's been hired to try to decipher the bad handwriting. She's a paleographer, which is an actual thing. And the son just rejects her. Like, the son does not want to be with her. The son wants his own space, and he's also fallen in love or been drawn to this other mysterious boy whose real name he doesn't know, who just keeps kind of calling him back, and he doesn't want to talk about it with his mom. And so she's having to constantly deal with the rejection from her own son, which I think is a real thing that parents have to deal with. And it's very hard, how you give your kids space without also putting all of the guilt on them, because sometimes they do need their space, but they also need to know that you love them and that you're there for them. Anyway, it's a struggle that was very real, that I was trying to get at, while also being aware that I didn't want to write a coming out scene. I didn't want to write, the two things I knew I didn't want to write when I started this was, I didn't want there to be any coming out scene, and I didn't want there to be any violence. I didn't want anyone to get bashed. I didn't want anyone to get hurt. But those are in so many stories because they're real, and because the world is dangerous, and because parents do have a hard time very often dealing with the children who come out to them. But I just felt like that's not where my storytelling interests lie. And I knew there would be a conversation eventually between the boy and as there is in the book. There is a conversation, but it doesn't follow the general outline of what a coming out scene might be like. The boys also don't struggle at all with their sexuality. They struggle with being seen by another person. One of the characters has asthma and has a big operation from when he was 10 on his chest, which I also had when I was a kid. And so he struggles with being touched, with the fear of being touched because of fear and shame around his body. But that's not specific to being queer. That's not even specific. I mean, it's specific to me as in it happened to me, but it's also a good metaphor for anybody who is feeling fear about being touched for the first time or touching someone for the first time, and yet wanting to, and wanting to make sure you're in a safe place with a safe person, to whom you give permission to touch you, or who has given you permission to touch them. And so that's what they're struggling with. But those are the things that I believe most people struggle with, or at least deal with, even if it's not a struggle for some people, they at least deal with it at some point.
Yeah. I think that's great too, because just having that in a book, because I feel like that's probably something that a lot of people as teens go through at some point. Like, it's like there's that kind of weird dichotomy. It's like, oh, well, I want to be touched, but I also, it's like for the first time, it's
scary.
It's terrifying. It can be terrifying, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe there's some kids out there who are like, no, I'm not scared at all. But I know I was when I was a teen. I was like, fuck that. No, that's terrifying.
Especially as a teen, you're scared because you're doing the thing that your parents told you to not do. And then you're trusting this person with your like physical body and this like very vulnerable emotional piece too, that you've like, when you think about the physical touch you experience for the first time as a teenager, like in adolescence, that's the first time anyone aside from like a parent touches any part of your body. I mean, hopefully, that is beyond like just friendliness. And that's like such a crazy barrier to overcome.
Yeah. And the surgery that I had left me feeling it was a very strange feeling. And I literally gave the feeling I have to the character in the book and found ways to describe it in the book, where I just like, even though the scar healed and the surgery was successful, I have an unusually shaped chest, a big scar, and my entire chest was left feeling vulnerable. Like I did not want it to be touched. Yeah. And the first person who did ultimately touch it was a massage therapist, of some woman who was working with a sort of, related to therapy. Like it was all kind of related, the body and the mind.
Like and, somatic therapy, maybe?
Yeah, like somatic therapy. And I remember when I first let her touch my chest, I burst into tears because it was very emotional. And we know, and we talk about the ways in which we hold feelings in our bodies in different places in our bodies. And it's different for different people. And for me, it was all in my chest, or mostly in my chest. And so it took me a long time to gain confidence and to gain to lose the shame around how I felt. And I fell in love for the first time when I was 30. I had boyfriends starting when I was in my early 20s. I had nothing like what the boys experienced at 16. Like that, that was like writing, science fiction for me. It was like making up something that I really it was like world building. But the emotions I experienced when I was 30, the physical sensations I experienced when I was in my early 20s, when I first started dating, were ideas that felt like I would guess could be parallel to what these two 16-year-old boys could be experiencing with each other.
Yeah. Being 16 and trying to create what that experience is like, being now an adult and like having experience in romantic relationships, and also feeling like you didn't really have that experience at 16. How did you marry the experience and also like how it was all feeling? Like, how did you kind of get there?
I just really tried to follow the plot and which also I didn't know what it was when I don't start with plot, and I barely even start with characters. I generally start with a place, like in this case, it was Rome. And I had places around Rome that I really liked and had fallen in love with. But it took me like, I don't know, let's say a year to piece the plot together. And the boys I gave the boys a certain progression in their meeting from the time they actually first meet to their early conversations to the ways in which we understand they're falling in love without that language ever actually being used, to, the time the American boy who feels confident with his body meets this Italian boy who has this scar, which of course he doesn't know about because he's wearing a shirt, and, accidentally goes to wipe some, juice from a strawberry off of the other boy's shirt, which would have meant he would have to touch his chest, but in a very innocent way, like just like to clean off the strawberry juice. But the boy with the who's hiding the shame of his scar in his chest jumps back and has a very dramatic reaction to the American boy trying to touch him. And following that and understanding that at a certain point, I'm going to want them to be together. It was I remember I wrote like 6 random scenes before I sent it to my editor, David Levithan at Scholastic. And he said, these are great, but you haven't written the scene where they kiss for the first time. So write that scene. So I wrote that scene and I kept writing until I finally, got to the moment where the boy with the surgery would allow the other boy to touch his chest. And I eventually decided to give the boys a secret room. I often like finding a secret space for my characters in my stories. And I was conscious about going into the room with them. And at a certain point, knowing that I, as the adult narrator, was going to need to leave them and get out of the room and leave them to their own devices, so that the reader at a certain point could then decide what it is they are actually doing. But I wanted to give them that safe space. I wanted it to be understood that they were trusting of each other. And then I was able to step back.
I love that. You were like, I'm just going to close this door
You
and
boys
just
have
slowly
fun.
step out. You guys
Snacks.
have fun. I love that. There's like a respect for these characters in a way that is really like kind and really nice.
Yeah, thank you.
So I'm going to bring up the one issue that I would immediately start thinking, and does Danny start thinking this, or Danny or Angela start thinking this, where at some point, Danny is not Italian. I assume Angelo is. At some point, the summer is going to be over. How did you kind of approach that without like, you don't do like spoilers or anything, unless it is like a big spoiler that something happens. But how did you kind of approach that idea of like, oh, this is a huge formative experience for the both of us, but it might not be lasting forever?
I knew that the only villain in the book was going to be time.
Yeah.
And I gave them 10 weeks together because I decided that was how long the mother was going to be invited to Rome to work on this academic project. I made her essentially an itinerant academic. So Danny is constantly being uprooted and brought to different places for a year or two. He's learned from that to stop making emotional connections to people because he was constantly going to have to be separated from whoever it is he likes or whoever his friends are, which is why meeting this boy, Angelo, is such a challenge, because he knows even from the minute they meet that they're going to have to part. And Matthew Lopez is a playwright who had a show called The Inheritance, which is a lot about queer history and these young queer men. And there's a line, and it's very inspired by E.M. Forster and Howard's End. And there's a line in it that is something like, falling in love is making an appointment with heartbreak. And that struck me very strongly. Even if you are in a long-term relationship and you're not dealing with a breakup, there's death, there's grief, there's many things that lay ahead that you Matthew, I think, is getting at in that quote. And so for these two boys, that appointment is already set. And I was aware that I was writing what might be considered a romance. I was aware that romances usually have what's called the happily ever after. But I thought to myself, are you supposed to tell teenagers that they should stay with the person they're dating as a teenager for the rest of their lives? I mean, sometimes they do, and it happens, and it's great. But it just didn't seem like that was the message I should say, or that should be said. And so I stopped into the Ripped Bodice, which is a great romance bookstore that happens to be right around the corner here in Brooklyn. And I asked about this, and they said, well, for young people, there's something called the happily ever after for now.
Oh.
And that seemed much more doable. And I knew from pretty early on what I wanted the last line of the book to be. I knew where the story was going to end. And there originally wasn't supposed to be any pictures at the beginning or the end of the book, which there are now, because I had some great conversations with my editor, David Levithan, about what the purpose of those pictures should be. But I will say, so the opening pictures are a walk, an empty walk, a walk through the empty city of Rome. And that's what I experienced when I lived in Rome during the pandemic, and everything was empty. But the end pictures expand on what I wanted the last line to be. And I would encourage anybody who's listening who may pick up the book to not flip ahead and look at the end pictures until you get to them in the narrative, if that's possible, because I think that they would work better. Won't ruin the book if you look at them first, but I like the idea that you can wait till you get to them. But I was very conscious of the fact that at the end of 10 weeks, they were going to have to part.
Yeah.
I feel like you definitely shouldn't be looking at the end of the book. It's part of the journey. Why would anybody ever want to? I don't even read the acknowledgments before.
You don't?
No, wow. I wait until I get to the end. That's why I like them at the end. Yeah, because then, I also sometimes I'll even put things in acknowledgments that are like hints to what happened, because sometimes I'm addressing readers. So I'm like, oh, just to let you know where my mind was at when I wrote this, here is just like a little line or two.
Right.
But yeah, no, nobody should be
skip
jumping
ahead.
forward.
Don't skip ahead.
Did you do the cover too? Did you illustrate the cover?
Yeah, I've up until this book, I've also designed the cover. I've also conceived of the cover, but I had no idea what this cover should be, especially because it's a different genre than I've ever written for before. I wanted it to look like a young adult book, whatever that means. And I was introduced to a new designer who I hadn't worked with before, named Maeve Norton at Scholastic. And she read the book and she really loved it. And she said, let me just come up with some ideas and I'll email you. And the very first idea she sent me was a murmuration of swallows in the shape of two boys kissing over the city of Rome against the sky. And I knew immediately that was the perfect image. It's just that I did not know if I could draw a murmuration of birds in the shape of two boys kissing over the city of Rome.
Right.
So I did it as two separate pieces of art. I did the murmuration, which is the shape that, thousands of swallows, when they fly together. Now, I keep getting swallows and sparrows mixed up. They're swallows. And they, when they flock, they seem to become of one mind, and they create shapes in the sky all together that are really, really beautiful. You can look up murmurations. And at one point, even though there's no murmurations during the summer in Rome, they happen in the winter and the autumn. One of the boys, the Italian boy, tells the American boy about murmurations, and they say, we are a murmuration of boys, because we are connected somehow, even when we are apart. And so that's where Maeve got the idea to do the murmuration of boys. So I eventually figured out how to draw it with my pencil and dots, like pointillism. And then I did a separate piece of art that was the skyline of Rome. And then Maeve took both of those images and superimpose them over an actual photograph of a sky. And then we worked together for another couple of months doing hundreds of iterations of what the title might look like until we came up with this final version, which I'm very, very happy with.
Yeah, it's a very good cover.
It's beautiful.
Thank you.
It's also rare that we have young adult authors who put like actual kissing on the cover.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, my editor, David Levithan, is also a world-class queer young adult author himself. And his first book was called Boy Meets Boy. He actually has a book called Two Boys Kissing that has a photograph of two boys kissing that came out, 15 years ago. And we, especially because this is a book outside of a genre I'm known for, we really, like I was saying, we really wanted to identify this as being what it is from the cover. And we all thought that having two boys actually kissing on the cover, even if they're made out of birds, would very clearly say from the outset that this book is different from my other books.
Yeah, definitely.
But before we were talking about the relationship having an expiration date, and like when you're a teenager, you can't the expectation, I think, while you're a teenager is you're like, this could last forever. But like as an adult, you look back and you're like, probably not. Could, but probably not. And I think like realistically, if we all think about the people that we dated when we were young, I would so really love to not even imagine a world where I ended up with any of those wonderful people. But I like that you're communicating a story where it's like there is an expiration date, but it's still so worth doing. It's so worth the experience and so worth finding connection and intimacy and love and adventure and like in this amazing city. And it's like that story deserves to be told. And I love that. I love an expiration date story as, for teenagers.
Yeah. Well, no, it's interesting because I was saying the boy travels a lot, sort of like an army kid. So he has convinced himself not to make any connections because he got tired of and sad about being separated from all the friends that he had. And he tells the story within the book of one friend where you can sort of sense from the way he's telling it that it's on the cusp of sexuality, but it's that moment maybe just before. And when he is separated from that kid, you can tell his heart breaks and he shuts down. So it's not just saying that even though there's an expiration date, it's worth it to give someone the chance to fall in love with them, that maybe it's also worth it to just have a connection, just to be with someone, even if there's going to be an expiration date that is sooner than you would want it to be.
Yeah.
That is happening, that's going to happen at the end of the school year. Because I once did a school visit on a military base in Germany, in a town called Eder Oberstein. And I remember flying to Germany, going to the army base, and the gates open and you're in a suburban American town. Like it is, the architecture is American, the schools are American, the money is American.
Wow.
There are no Germans there. It's all Americans. And I remember seeing kids in the audience as I was talking about whatever I was talking about at the time, whatever books I had out, really, really like groups of kids, pairs of kids holding each other in this very sweet way, just very strongly holding each other. And I remember asking one of the teachers afterwards, because if you had just like blindfolded me and landed me there, I would have thought I was in America.
Yeah.
And I remember asking like, wow, these kids really seem very close to each other. They're really, like holding each other. And she said, that's because they know at any minute their parents might get deployed and they might have to leave.
Wow.
So they're holding on to the kids that they have now really strongly. So that's another way to deal with what it means to be taken away from someone, or to know that someone could be taken away from you very suddenly. And that's always stayed in my mind as well.
Yeah. Wow, that's so like it's sad. But it's also, again, sad and also to the tune of what we were saying, really nice to be able to experience that level of intimacy and care for each other, even on a friendship level. So I have had conversations recently about how sometimes as a culture, we've gotten so obsessed with boundaries, creating boundaries, that I think what we've done oftentimes is we're creating boundaries, but what we're actually doing is avoiding growth in favor of just not feeling uncomfortable, and then disguising it as I'm creating a healthy boundary, which is like, for some people, being touched in general is a really hard thing for them. And you have every right to make a boundary about that. And there's value in finding ways where you can push past it. Even in Runaway With Me, with the chest situation, there's value in finding like, okay, that might be a boundary for you, but let's see where we can expand on that, like where intimacy lives beyond you feeling uncomfortable. And yeah, so that's really nice. That like physical touch element is really nice.
Yeah, and saying, you know, like letting someone in, there's a metaphor. You want to let someone in. And with an operation and a scar and the situation with the chest, it's both literal and metaphoric at the same time. You know, letting the other person into the area of the chest, to touch the scar, to touch the chest, is letting someone in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
In the darkest corners of the internet, a nameless, formless entity has been growing. No one dares question where it was created or what it wants, but those who have been entranced by its musings chant its blood-curdling name in unison. Horror Movie Night!
Find Horror Movie Night on your favorite podcasting app or at hmnpodcast.com.
So I wanted to know, how many books do you have that are all middle grade? Because I did look on Goodreads, but it's just, Goodreads is kind of a mess because it just lists all the translations and it doesn't give it to you in like a chronological order unless you like go through and try and find a way to do it. So how many middle grade books did you write?
Well, I would say that's a hard question. I guess 4. I guess Hugo, Wonderstruck, The Marvels, and Big Tree are all books that I wrote and illustrated that are middle grade. I've illustrated for, a lot for other writers like Frindle by Andrew Clements.
Yeah, I was going to say Frindle is like one of the ones that I feel like Frindle is one of the books that radicalized me as a child and made me
Nothing
the
can make me
contrarian
happier.
that I am.
That's so fun.
Nothing can make me happier.
The beginning of our radicalization was Frindle. That's wow.
Making up a different name for a pen.
Ah.
I was like, that's so cool. I'm going to start doing weird stuff like that.
Yes. When I read that manuscript, when the editor, Stephanie Lurie, sent me Andrew Clements' manuscript, I just was floored. Like, I love the fact that you get to hate the teacher for the entire book and then discover at the end that the teacher is the hero.
Yeah.
And the way that she respects the kid, the way the kid is radicalized within the book, and that she's actually doing it. She's setting up a situation where he's forced to fight against her. Mm-hmm. And that's actually part of the education. That's part of the lesson, is sometimes you have to push back against the person telling you what to do. Mm-hmm. And that, it's a very radical idea. So I've illustrated a lot of middle grade readers and a lot of other books by Andrew Clements, like The School Story and The Landry News. But Hugo, Wonderstruck, The Marvels, and Big Tree. And then I had done a book called The Robot King many years ago that I guess would be described as middle grade as well. So just a few.
And what was were there any kind of challenges to writing in YA compared to middle grade that you noticed and maybe weren't expecting?
Not in terms of the process, right? In terms of the struggle to figure out what's going to happen in the plot, trying to figure out who the boys are, who the characters are, and like many of my books, I have multiple storylines happening. So there's also a queer love story in 1940, in 1900, and in the 1600s. So I'm also juggling the ways in which those stories interact with each other and the main story in 1986. And those are all versions of what I've dealt with previously. The Marvels had a story from 1766 to 1900, 5 generations, all told in pictures. Wonderstruck told 2 stories, one in 1927 and one in 1977. So the multiple storyline is interesting to me. I don't think I'd ever done 4 of them before, but it was a version, sort of a magnified version of things I had done before. But I'm always trying to do something I haven't done before, always trying to take what I've learned previously and do new things with it. So the general umbrella feels similar in that I didn't know what I was doing. I was stumbling into something I hadn't done before, and I was armed with all the knowledge I had from everything I had made previously. So I didn't stumble in, I was ready when I stumbled in, but that again, as I said, that still means I have to figure out a lot of new things, not just the aspect of sexuality itself, but the ways in which the story was going to be told, how it's going to be structured, working with David Levithan, the editor, to figure out how the stories were going to evolve. Originally there's 2 stories that we flash back to, and then one story that is told by the Italian character to the American character. And originally the story that's told was another flashback. But we started talking about the purpose that it could serve if it's told by the narrator. And that became very important to the plot. So that was part of a rewrite. But in general, it's all about, just trying to figure out what happens next and who the characters are and what their motivations are, and then the structure of the book itself.
Yeah. I feel like every author kind of at some point feels like they don't know how to write, because I think it's usually around like either the beginning or the midway point of writing a novel. It just kind of, everything becomes very, I don't want to say heavy, because it's not like emotionally heavy, but it's like all of a sudden you're like, oh no, you realize that there is a world that there is there, and you're like, shit, how do I not mess this up, and how did I get here to begin with? So it's like, it's kind of always that like idea of, oh well, even though I've been doing this for years, it's like, all right, well, how do I do this? It's like, if you sit down and explain to somebody, like sitting here with us, you can be like, oh well, I had this idea, and these were the inspirations, and this is how I wrote it, and this is how I edited it, and this is how it came together. But still, there's some kind of weird magic that it's like, that's the elements of it, but I have no idea how it all worked and how I put it together.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, the key is trying to help myself not feel bad when I get in those places where I don't know what's happening next, or where my mind wants to tell me all those things that you're just describing, that you're a bad writer, that you don't know what you're doing, that you aren't going to figure this one out. Sure, you figured the previous one out, and every previous one, or many of the previous ones.
Yeah.
For many years, like, I have stories that have never come together that I had to put aside. But it just took me a while to realize that's part of my process, and it's okay to not know what comes next, but you have to keep working. You have to keep going back to it at a certain point. Yeah, take a break. I have other things I'm working on generally at any one time, so I can turn my attention to a different project. But I'm aware that I need to make myself finish, and sometimes it feels like you're just waiting for the next lightning strike or the next moment of inspiration, but sometimes you have to force its hand and try to get it to happen, which might entail a lot of time sitting over a blank notebook page or an empty computer screen.
And that's the frustrating part too.
Yes.
Just like I bring that up sometimes in therapy. We'll unpack my therapy sessions here, where my therapist just kind of asks me, he's like, well, like anytime I'm like struggling with motivation or something, he's like, well, what do you do to like get an idea? And I'm like, I daydream. He's like, well, then just do that. He's like, that counts as working. Stop beating yourself up that your fingers are not touching a keyboard and just take the time to sit there and just daydream, just part of your job, just to know that.
Open up, try to trust your instincts more, I always feel like I'm in a battle between my mind and my feelings, or like whatever it is, my brain against my instincts. Yeah, I did a book called Big Tree, which is about two seeds who were trying to save the world at the end of the Cretaceous era, right before the meteor hits the Earth, destroying most life on the planet. And the two seeds are sycamore seeds who are siblings. And one is very rigid and scientific and thinks he has to do exactly what Mama Tree tells them to do and has to follow the rules. And his sister is very dreamy and very poetic. And ultimately in the story, it turns out that, of course, they need each other. They need to work together. But I realized when I finished, I had been writing about my own brain and my own self, and that I need, and of course, like for part of the story, the rigid scientific character causes tragedy. Like he causes a tragedy, and that fear, it's not really a fear. It's that feeling that I have to stick to my guns that I'm right until, no matter what destruction it causes, has to be tempered by the ability to listen to my instincts and to know what's right and to trust that my feelings should be listened to. So that definitely turned out to be quite an interesting self-portrait that I didn't realize I was writing.
I love that you found there's your subconscious was like, no, this is what we're going to unpack together with the world.
Exactly.
Because people are going to be reading this.
Right. And ultimately, if a story works, it's probably because it's about something that readers can relate to in some fashion. Yeah. So whether you read it as a literal story, well, it's hard to read it as a literal story because it's about two talking seeds, but it is, if you read it literally, about a sibling, two siblings who are in a struggle with each other and are trying to figure out, they love each other, but they're trying to figure out how to survive. They drive each other crazy. That just on a basic level is something a lot of people can relate to, whether it's a sibling that drives them crazy that they love, or a friend, or someone in the world, or if you realize, like me, that it's yourself, that both of the characters are you. And that everything I've ever made is, some kind of self-portrait.
Yeah. Alyssa, ask the question. I know that you're wanting to.
Oh, I like to know if people are a pantser or a plotter. Is that what it is? Pantser or plotter?
Yeah.
Okay.
What's it called when you don't write in order and you don't know what's going to happen and you try to figure it out? I guess it's more
Pantser. We count that.
Yeah.
It's another one for me. That's 3.
Yeah, I definitely do not know or work out what the plot is going to be ahead of time. The plot is revealed as I'm putting the story together and as I'm figuring out who the characters are and where the characters need to be and what they need to do. I need to get them here for this, or I need them to get there for something else. And then that becomes the plot as I am working.
So you write also individual scenes that aren't connected first?
Often, yeah. Runaway With Me. The first thing I wrote was the two boys climbing up a staircase that I remembered in Rome that I really liked. I didn't know what was at the top of the staircase for the boys. I didn't know who the boys were, but for some reason, when I decided to start writing, that staircase came to mind. So I was like, all right, I'll just write them walking up this staircase. Mm-hmm. And that's when I decided one of them was going to have trouble breathing as they walked up the stairs. So that's when I gave one of them asthma, like I do. And that sort of led naturally to the surgery that I had. And the other one is kind of helping him, but being patient. And when they got to the top of the staircase in the scene, I didn't know what was going to be there for them. So I stopped writing. And then I thought, well, I guess I should write the scene where they meet. They seem to know each other, climbing the staircase. So I should write the scene where they meet. And then I had to write the scene where they tell each other their names. And I didn't have names for either of them. Mm-hmm. And I have baby naming books. I have lists. I Google, what's a good name from Italy in the 1960s or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing felt right. So sometimes, authors say, I just listen to my characters and I write down what they say, which always annoys me because that would, it sounds much easier than, like writing.
Right.
And because I do feel like I make everybody say everything that they say, but I guess sometimes it can feel a little magical like that. Anyway, so I just thought, okay, I'll let them tell me what their names are. So I remember writing the scene where the one character says, "What's your name?" And the only thing I could think for that character to say was, "I don't have a name. You name me."
Oh.
And that seemed really ridiculous and weird.
Yeah.
But I literally couldn't think of anything else.
Wow.
So I had the other kid say, "Well, I'm not going to name you. That's ridiculous." and the first kid says, "Okay, well then I'll name you." And the other kid says, "Well, I already have a name." And the first kid says, "Not one that matters." Oh. So he gives him a name based on something that they had just been talking about. They had already told the story of this sculptor Bernini who had an assistant in the 1600s named Dante. So he names him Dante, but calls him Danny, which is short for Dante. And so the American kid, who has now been dubbed Danny, even though that's not his actual name, is cornered into naming the Italian kid. Mm-hmm. And he had just woken up previously in the opening scene in a church where he had seen these beautiful angels on the ceiling that had black curly hair, like the boy in front of him. So he names him Angelo, like an angel. But if I had named the boy Angelo, like his mother named him Angelo, and he just happened to meet a boy named Angelo, it would be a little on the nose.
Yeah.
But not quote unquote realistic, whatever that means. But because he's named by a boy who clearly is attracted to him and loves him, is going to fall in love with him and thinks he's beautiful without saying he's beautiful, it felt right. So the entire book, they become Danny and Angelo. And to the point where Danny pretty much forgets he had another name. And then that becomes part of the way, part of their story as well. Mm-hmm. But that was the first time that happened when I was usually I at some point figure out what their names are.
Yeah.
And but yeah, that's how that played out for Runaway With Me.
That's so cool. What a beautiful story and a beautiful anecdote about just names in general. I love that. Yeah. And the characters did tell you. They told you, they first told you to F off and I'm not telling you. And then you ended up finding it anyway.
Yeah. And they were good names. I was really into the names that they seemed to have chosen.
Yeah.
But again, within the context of the story, they didn't tell me what their real names were. Mm-hmm. They told me what names they were making up for each other.
Right.
Which is different and turned out to be interesting to me.
Yeah, for sure. And something you do when you're 16 and you're in love and everything feels, hazy and glossed over. It's let's make up names for each other. That's so cool.
Yeah, it did end up feeling kind of romantic, if extremely weird. I mean, the Italian boy also says he's 3,000 years old and is has been on the verge of death since he was born. But like Rome, he always comes through. So he knows everything about the city. He's a very weird kid.
Very poetic.
But yeah, he knows a lot of stories about Rome that are the stories I learned when I was in Rome during the pandemic that I gave to him to share with the kid he's in love with, which would be my way of sharing those same stories with the readers. Mm-hmm.
I love that. I think that Angelo in real life would have a really killer Tumblr account.
Yes, that's one thing I'm also one of the only things I'm aware of when I'm writing a story or making up a story is that it's going to be before cell phones.
Oh, beautiful.
And social media. I just have no desire to write about it. I also feel like I really deeply do not understand what it's like for a young person to live their life on a phone and on social media.
Yeah.
And so by setting it before cell phones, it becomes, it's not it doesn't feel like a period piece to me sometimes, like the 80s or the 90s or the 60s or 70s. But it is a period piece for the reader. It is actually a period piece in, real life, because it's not a period we're living in anymore. And even though I'm not writing about the specifics of that technology, all of the themes of being a teenager, falling in love for the first time, finding yourself, gaining independence from your parents, finding other people like you, allowing yourself to be seen. Like, my guess is those are relatively universal. Yeah. So I can get at themes that modern teenagers care about and think about, but just in a more symbolic way.
Yeah.
And you're getting rid of all the noise too, because that's what all of that is.
Yeah. And it's noise to me. Like, it's just like, I have a very complicated, as we all do, I have a very complicated relationship with social media. And I have made certain decisions around what I do and do not look at, what I allow myself to how I allow myself to interact with it. And ultimately for me, I mean, all I had was Instagram, which I came too late. But ultimately I had to quit cold turkey and then eventually decide that I was going to use Instagram the way I wanted to use it, not the way it was telling me to use it, because it tells you what to do. It tells you how to use it.
Yeah.
It demands attention from you all the time. It's designed to make you feel bad about yourself. It's designed to make you jealous of your friends. It's terrible. But it's a really good way to get information out about your work. And it's a really good way sometimes to like share stuff with your friends if you want. So, and again, everyone has to deal with and make whatever decisions they need to for themselves. But my decision was, I'm not ever going to scroll. And I'm only going to post when I have a new work coming out and when I'm going on tour, so that I can meet people in real life. That's how I can get the word out.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's all I do.
Yeah, like you're using it as a tool instead of like a lifestyle extension.
Yeah. And
that's what I started doing too.
Yeah. Yeah. And we all have to find our way to manage it. And it was interesting because when I did quit cold turkey for a while, I wrote like a little goodbye post, because I did not delete my Instagram account. I knew I didn't want to get rid of it. I wanted people to be able to find my work. I want to be able to have a way to find my website. I wanted it. I was conscious, especially when I first got Instagram, of posting just like a lot of interesting things. Like if you scroll way to the bottom of my Instagram, there's pictures, close-ups of my studio and the collections I have and sketches. Like I just posted a lot of things I thought people would find or might find interesting. It wasn't just connected to me or my life or things I was doing, I just wanted to be interesting. And I said goodbye, and I got a lot of really interesting notes from folks via email or whatever other way they got to me, saying that they were jealous or they wish they were able to do it. And this was from a lot of people who also were really good at Instagram, like who posted really charming, wonderful things about their work. There's people who can post about their good reviews or their positive whatever positive things happen to them in a way that doesn't feel like bragging, that feels like you want to share it with them. And almost everyone who reached out to me said, oh my God, I hate it. Like I hate something about it and I feel trapped by it. And so I just remember thinking like, well, then use it the way you want. Like stop doing the thing that you're not enjoying, but it's hard. It's very, very hard.
Yeah. It's also, the unfortunate part is the algorithms are made to, you'll be successful if you use Instagram the way that they want you to. And like successful meaning people will actually see the things you share. And like, I cannot, the times where my social media has done really well is when I'm chronically online and I cannot do it. Like it's just not sustainable. It's a comparison machine. It's a highlight reel. It's like all of the things mushed together to make you feel the size of a pea in the worst way. And it's just not. And at the same time, so you also have to exist in a space where like you are making yourself the main character too. It's like a weird, I don't know.
I also found I love asking people questions like, what did you do this summer?
Yeah.
And they're like, did you not see the 4,000 pictures I posted from my beach trip and from my trip to Rome? Like, no, like you have to
Yeah.
I want to know.
Yeah.
But you have to tell me.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I want to tell someone about something I've done, I'll tell them.
Mm-hmm.
And but again, it's part of our life. We have to all decide how we use it or don't use it. I do know people who have no social media. But especially if you're young and especially if you're just starting out with your work, it's very hard to feel like you can do what you do without social media. And again, for me, like I said, it's a good way to get word out that I have a new book coming, or that I've got a new book, or that I want you to know a little bit more about the new book that I've done. And I always say, like, I leave myself open to change my mind at any time, because I always feel like the second I say I'm never going to post X, like everyone's going to, like, the next day I'm going to post X.
Yeah.
Like of course, like anything can change at any time. And you can change your decision. You can change what you want to do. But I know for myself and my mental health, and also I've been working long enough that I also have other ways of my books getting out there. I know that there are, that there is some publicity that's going to happen with the book. I've been on tour for a month with Runaway With Me, traveling around the country. And then I was on the road for probably 2 months before that, speaking around the country at bookseller, teacher, and librarian conventions. And that's not something everybody gets to do, right? So I'm very appreciative of everything that I do get to do. And I just think it's important to find ways to manage social media so you do feel like you're in control in some fashion.
Yeah.
And and it does help me feel like I have more time to work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Before we let you go, we have 2 questions. My first question is, what was it like to have The Invention of Hugo Cabret adapted into a movie directed by Martin Scorsese? Because I'm a film nerd, so like that has to be like one of the things that was like on your bucket list that you didn't realize was there, and you're like, holy shit, that's amazing.
Yeah, it was as extraordinary as anybody might imagine it could be.
Not only that, it was Martin Scorsese, but it was a great movie too. Yeah. So it's like it took your book and didn't. There's plenty of adaptations that kind of the movie just, everybody's like, oh, the movie just was not good. When you have a movie that is as good as the book, that's amazing. That's like, I think that's the dream, really.
Yeah, I mean, when I was making the book, because it's about cinema, I do remember people asking me if I thought it could be adapted for the movies. And I was very clear that the answer was no, it cannot be adapted for the movies, because at the end of the book becomes part of the plot. The thing that you're actually holding in your hand becomes part of the story. And so therefore, there would be no way to end the movie with you holding anything. And then I got a call that this producer wanted to buy the rights to the book and offer it to Martin Scorsese to make into a film. You don't say no to something like that. But I was also very aware. Well, I guess it made me, it was shocking, but it was also made me curious about what that could mean. And I thought about some movie directors while I was making Hugo, especially Alfred Hitchcock, because of the way he uses the camera to help tell the story. That was very influential on me when I was making the book. So was the films of Jean Vigo and René Clair, French filmmakers. But I can honestly say that I did not once think about Martin Scorsese. It was not on my radar. I don't watch violent films, so I hadn't seen very many of his movies. But the second his name came up, and I did a little bit of research, and I learned a little bit about him, and discovered that, and maybe I knew this as well. Maybe I didn't have to really research this, but when his name came up, and I understood that he was also not only a world class, maybe the best, one of the best filmmakers who have ever lived, he's also a film scholar. He's also a person who is concerned about the preservation of old movies. He is somebody who has rediscovered lost film directors and brought them back to attention, like Michael Powell, who made The Red Shoes, and then he fell out of favor when he made a really horrifying film called Peeping Tom. Scorsese was responsible for bringing Michael Powell back into the public limelight, all of which are parts of the plot of The Invention of Hugo Cabret. There's the film director, there's the scholar René Tabard, there's Hugo bringing Méliès back into public attention. Someone pointed out to me that Hugo opens with a kid looking through the clock down at the world below him, the way Goodfellas opens with Henry Hill as a child looking through his window at mobsters on the street down below, dreaming that one day I could be like that. And I later read stories about Martin Scorsese, who had asthma as a kid, like I did, sitting in his window in Little Italy looking at the street below.
I have chills. That's so crazy.
So at a certain point, I began to feel like I had accidentally written Martin Scorsese's imaginary autobiography.
Yeah.
And that I had actually written this whole story for him. And then of course, buried in my pictures in The Invention of Hugo Cabret are references to René Clair and Jean Vigo and all of these other filmmakers. And Scorsese is probably one of the few people who would have picked up my book, who would have gotten all of those film references. And it was extraordinary. Like I got to visit the set. I ended up being in the movie. I have a cameo in the last shot, which is a big tracking shot that includes almost every actor from the entire film come together for this party. It's a tracking shot that lasts about 5 minutes. It was filmed by Larry McConkey, who also filmed all of Scorsese's great tracking shots, including the famous Copacabana tracking shot in Goodfellas. And during the filming of the tracking shot in Hugo, Scorsese came out onto the set because he usually directs from a black tent where he's watching everything on 3D glasses because it was filmed in 3D. And he came out onto the set with Larry McConkey to see how we were all doing, because we had to film it like 5 times in a row. And it's hard, it's a lot. There's like hundreds of people making this one shot happen. There's walls moving when you don't see them moving to allow room for the camera to come around. And there's mic booms just out of sight. And there's some of the extras in the party who are dressed in period costumes are actually tech people who, when the camera moves away from them, are moving tables and moving furniture and putting things back.
Wow.
There's a shot somewhere on YouTube. If you Google Hugo tracking shot, final scene, you can find like an overview of how this shot was made. And Scorsese came out on the set and he asked us how we were doing. And he said to us that we were much more patient than the people who were filming the Goodfellas scene in the Copacabana, because every time they had to redo it, and he said, we have to do it one more time, everybody sitting at the tables in the Copacabana would moan and be like, oh no, we don't want to do it again. And Scorsese said to us, I don't know what they were complaining about. All they had to do was sit there. What could have been so hard?
Yeah.
And Larry McConkey, in front of all of us, said, Marty, did you not know that all of the people online outside of the Copacabana at the beginning of the shot, when the camera comes out of the car with Henry Hill and goes through the line and you go through a back door down the steps into the kitchen, all of those people online are the same extras who are in the Copacabana when they get there. Because they couldn't afford 2 sets of extras.
Wow.
So everyone had to be in their coats online. And then while the camera was going through the kitchen, they had to run around the other way, get into the room, get into their tables, take off their coats, lift up their glasses, and make pretend they'd been there the whole time.
Wow.
And Scorsese said he never knew that.
Wow.
And I'm sitting there dressed, like in a costume designed by Sandy Powell, designed by, surrounded by people either from history like George Méliès and his wife, or people I made up like Hugo and Isabel. Also, all these famous actors, Ben Kingsley and Helen McCrory and Sacha Baron Cohen. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, what is happening right now?
Right.
Like this is my actual life. Like
Yeah.
I'm experiencing this right now. And I think even then I was aware that I was going to be retelling the story like I'm retelling it right now.
Yeah.
And feeling this, because I feel like every time I retell the story, I remember all of that, right? Like I remember all those details, and it's super fun to retell that story and to retell the moments on the set. So the answer to your question, what was it like to have Martin Scorsese make a movie out of my book, is it was fantastic.
Yeah.
It was really great.
It's amazing.
By the way, for everybody listening, that is the importance of mindfulness. So that when you are sitting there in an experience like that, you can tell the story like that.
Yeah.
And, like, it just being such an amazing moment. So
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's so, I can't even imagine being in that moment, being like, what is my life right now?
Right?
Oh my God.
This is crazy.
Yeah.
I will say I wrote a book about the making of the movie of my book. It's called the Hugo Movie Companion. I interviewed 50 people from the movie set.
Wow.
From Scorsese to the dog trainer. I asked them what they were like as kids, how they got into what they do, and what they did for Hugo. And then the last chapter is about how all those people collaborated on the last scene that I'm in.
Oh, I love it.
And
Cool.
so it's really, really a book about movie making and collaboration and what happens behind the scenes, and the idea that there are a lot of jobs that we do not know about that are out there for people to do. The model makers, the people who are sewing and finding the props, like the people who are in charge of the extras, being an extra. Like there are so many different jobs out there. And I really wanted to look at how everybody worked. And in the end, I think 5,000 people were employed for up to 3 to 5 years making that movie.
Wow.
Because I sat at my desk writing a weird story about a kid in black and white French films. So that's very satisfying.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is also important to note, that the reason why movies look the way they do and feel the way they do, and why AI kind of turning them all into these computer generated spewed out things, that's why they don't look as good.
Yeah. And they
and
don't
that's
feel
why, yes, it's because there are actual, like you said, 5,000 people working on it and making it this living creation instead of just numbers on a computer that just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
That's my AI spiel, because I'm sick of everybody being like, oh, isn't AI cool? Don't you want AI to like help you write books? No, I don't want that.
Yeah, nor should you.
Yeah.
The easier question we have before we let you go is, what are you reading right now?
Oh, I am reading, it's funny, I mentioned it in passing earlier. I'm reading Howard's End by E.M. Forster.
Oh, nice.
I read Morris recently, his book about these two young men who fall in love in university in England. It was made into a fantastic film, one of Hugh Grant's first starring movies. And actually, the movie is one of the rare cases, like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, where the movie is actually a little bit better than the book because they fix some plot problems. And but the book is unbelievably gorgeous. And then I recently read a passage to India. Often when I find an author who I really like, I like to move through their books, and read as many as I can. So I just finished A Passage to India, which I really loved, and I picked up Howard's End, which is great, and I'm really loving it. And I just finished a really great book called Portrait of a Marriage, which is about Vita Sackville-West and her husband. Vita Sackville-West is most well known as Virginia Woolf's lover, and she is the person who inspired Orlando, and it's who Orlando is really about. And Vita Sackville-West had, I think she and her husband had 3 kids, and they had no idea about their parents' other lives. Both of their parents were bisexual, but loved each other very much, stayed together while they had these relationships with many other people. And it really wasn't until they were teenagers that the kids began to discover the full stories of their parents' lies. And rather than rejecting their parents or feeling like their parents had lied to them, they really embraced who their parents were. And so there's this great book called Portrait of a Marriage that one of the sons wrote about his parents and quotes at length from an autobiography that he found that his mother wrote when she was in her 20s.
Wow.
About the first woman she fell in love with. And she never published it in her lifetime, and she put it away in the closet, but she wrote in the autobiography that I'm writing this down because I think in the future people will need to know about this and will want to know about same-sex love. And
So cool.
the portrait is sections from that autobiography, sections about the husband, and then the son giving us context between each chapter about his parents, about what was happening in history at the time, and more information about what was going on. So that's what I've been reading.
I want to
That's
check
awesome.
out that one too.
Yeah.
Yeah, good books.
The TBR
Alyssa.
continues.
Yes.
Alyssa, do you have anything else to ask, or?
I don't think so. I mean, I loved learning about you and the way that you tell stories. And as we've continued doing this podcast, because I'm not a writer, expanding on what storytelling means for each author has been a really cool experience. And it's especially cool to learn about your experience writing stories alongside having the illustrations, and then having it like the written medium and the one that is visual coming together for your storytelling is just very, very cool. So I appreciate you sharing so much with us.
Thank you.
Wait, I have one more question. I lied. Are you going to keep writing YA, do you think?
Yeah, my next book, which I am working on now, is another queer young adult novel, and I'm really enjoying being in this space.
Good. Then we can't wait to have you back on.
All right, it's a deal. It's a deal.
Amazing. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks,
All
Brian.
right, thank you so much. Great to talk to you.
When she asks me how far we can take it, I tell her we can take it across the entire universe. You are my universe, I'm just a friend.
And now I guess we could just wrap it up quickly. Alyssa, what are you reading?
I'm reading Gay the Prey Way, and I'm almost done with it. And it is such a great story. I've been enjoying it so much. And yeah, that's what I'm reading. What are you reading?
So wait, Gay the Prey Away got you out of your reading slump.
It did get me out of my
How
reading
exciting.
slump. I got through Gay the Prey Away in like a week and a half, which is shorter than, that's like my third book of the year, and it's the end of April.
Fantastic.
So yeah, thank you, Natalie.
It's all downhill from here, meaning good.
Yeah.
Like 'cause speed. The speed goes faster
I'll
downhill.
pick up the speed.
But it's uphill for like quality and
Yeah.
craftsmanship. I am reading the new Hunger Games book,
Ooh.
which definitely, I wasn't in a reading slump, but this is honestly, it's great.
Is it?
I'm about to finish it. I have like maybe 10 pages left. I want to cry. And I knew what I was getting into. It's Haymitch's Hunger Games. So it's like,
Yeah.
I know
You
it's
know what's
not going to
coming.
be, and I know there's still going to be 25 more years of the Hunger Games after this story,
Right.
but I still wanted to see what there was left to be kind of dredged up from this story. And honestly, there was a good amount, and I really like it. And I can't recommend it anymore. Like, I think it's Mockingjay was my favorite of that series. I think this one might be my favorite.
Wow.
No.
Wow. Okay.
I think
love
the
that.
way it talks about like propaganda, especially now, it's
Yeah, I'm sure
like,
it's
like real history being wiped off of the internet and the government's websites in America, and seeing how all of that happens in the Hunger Games version of America. I'm like,
yeah.
oh shit.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
great.
shit.
Great.
Well, hopefully what you're reading is not a light suggestion of what's to come.
Yeah. I'm going to move on. As soon as I'm done this one, I'm going to read Kayla's new book,
Okay.
The
Love
Corruption of Hollis Brown. So next
it.
episode, I'll check in with you and let you know how that's going.
Amazing. I love it. Well, thank you all for listening. Go to our Instagram, YAOK Podcast, and let us know what you're reading. And is that all we got? Is there anything else?
Yeah, I think that's it.
That's it.
Yeah,
All right. Well, we'll see you guys in the next one.
I
You're listening to the Geekscape Network.